Hello friends, welcome to Kizuna India-Japan Study Forum. Some of you may be knowing that the Kizuna India-Japan Study Forum was launched last year in September by the MOSAI, which is an association formed by the Indian scholars of Japanese studies. The forum aims to unravel, document, and disseminate the lesser known or under-researched aspects of India-Japan, historical and cultural interactions through lectures, seminars, conferences, and publications. The forum, since its inception, has held one international conference. The theme was Discovering India-Japan Civilizational Ties and Southeast Asia Connectivities. It was held in February this year, and we have also held 9 monthly lectures. These lectures are available on YouTube also. Today we have two very eminent personalities, both of whom excel in their respective field. Let me first introduce the speaker, today's speaker. Today's presentation by Professor Benoy Behl is the 10th under Kizuna monthly lecture series. He will briefly talk about the Hindu deities and Sanskrit in Japan, followed by a colorful documentary. Benoy Behl, Adjunct Professor, National Institute of Advanced Studies, Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, is a noted filmmaker, art historian, and an avid photographer. His penchant for Asian monuments and art heritage is evident from his 146 documentaries, which are regularly screened at major cultural institutions worldwide, and a huge wealth of 53,000 photographs. Stories of his pioneering works have been carried by the National Geographic magazine and the BBC World News. We are indeed very fortunate to have Mr. Kiran Karnik, a well-known educationist, columnist, and author as chair. A prominent Indian administrator, he was President NESCOM from 2001 to 2008 and director on the board of Reserve Bank of India from 2011 to 2015, and as founder CEO of Discovery India 1995 to 2001, he launched the very popular Discovery Channel and Animal Planet in India and South Asia. He is currently the chairperson of Indraprastha Institute of Information Technology, Delhi, and Helpage in India. I now request Mr. Karnik to chair the session. Thank you very much, Mr. Karnik. Please chair the session.
Thank you very much, Sushila, for that generous introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to friends joining this from around the globe, and greetings from Gurgaon near Delhi, where I am based. First, I want to say what a pleasure it is, and I want to thank Kizuna India and the India-Japan Study Forum for this opportunity, not only for the chance to participate and listen to what I'm sure is going to be a good discussion, but particularly to hear a lecture that I'm certain is going to be of great interest, relevance, and very revealing on various factors which have shaped the going forward of Indo-Japan ties in the cultural sphere. And who better to do this than the person we have as our speaker and filmmaker today, Mr. Benoy Behl. Professor Behl was introduced briefly by Sushila, and I will say a few words more on him later. But first, I want to step back a bit and just spend a couple of minutes on the Indo-Japan ties and why I'm particularly pleased and happy to be here today. We have a lot in common. And now, in recent years in particular, we share a certain geostrategic view of the world, which has brought us together in very many ways. For some years now, our leaders seem to have had a great personal chemistry. But beyond that, the people-to-people contact, the cultural contact, the historical and civilizational links have been very, very strong. These have been supplemented and solidified in a formal way through various relationships at the more formal government level. And now we share a partnership and a certain perspective on the Indo-Pacific through the Quad. But those are more recent. The historical ties go back to a long, long time ago, and you'll hear more of that later. I'm no expert on it, so I won't speak on it. But I do recognize the fact that we have many things in common and many shared things, most of all, the Buddhist heritage, which is the subject and theme today. There's also a Sanskrit connection, which I didn't know till very recently, and again picked up mainly thanks to Professor Behl. He has researched this, and others I'm sure have done this, but he is the one who first told me about it, and I was quite amazed, because the Buddhist connection is well known. This one to me was not so well known. Nor was the fact that there are so many common things culturally even today, where there are so many temples to Saraswati in Japan, where what in India we call Havan or Homa is also practiced in a large number of temples in Japan called Goma. So, I think these are less known, underreported facets of the many dimensions of where India and Japan come together and share so many commonalities and so much, though we are so far apart geographically, culturally and mentally. I think we are very close in so many ways, and you hear much more of that as we go forward today. Just a few words in addition to what Professor Sushila and Narsimhan said about Professor Behl. Apart from his filmmaking and photography and so on, which have been documented and well known, he's also particularly on heritage and Buddhist art and the Buddhist monasteries and temples, not only in India, but around the world. And he's brought these in some way to an Indian audience. He's brought back things which many of us didn't know earlier from parts of the globe which many of us would never have visited. He's gone around, documented carefully, painstakingly, and brought it all back into documentaries and put them as permanent archival material there. Speaking of archives, it's a matter of some pride for us in India that 2 of his photographs are there in the Arctic archives, which are preserved, and they're supposed to last for centuries and centuries as a heritage of all mankind. And 2 of Benoy's photographs are there, buried in the Arctic, to last almost forever. I think that's a matter of some satisfaction that some cultural artifacts from India are also there, among other things. His recent work on yoga has been noteworthy. He's done a film on it. He's gone around the world showing it. And as you know, the interest in yoga is so high now that this documentation is really of great help and would be very, very interesting and helpful to all those interested in this. I can say much more about Benoy. He's also been a dear friend for many years, but therefore I will refrain. He is too well known to read more introduction, except that I do want to repeat that he's been prolific in his photography, his filmmaking, and importantly, his documentation, not only through photographs and films, but through text, through books, through other material that's available, through his lectures around the world, and through shows in museums, where hundreds of thousands of people have come, seen what he's photographed, seen what he's documented, and heard him lecture. So he's, I think, too well known for me to say more. It's a pleasure to be here today. Let me say again, thank you once again, Sushila, for this opportunity. And thank you, Benoy. I know we talk in other ways, but for the opportunity to see this and listen to you with this particular film. Let me stop there and hand over to Professor Behl, who's going to introduce the film first, and then we'll see it. After that, you'll say a few closing words, and then we can open, time permitting, for some questions and then wrap up. That's the agenda for today. We should be wrapped up in an hour or so from now. But over to you, Benoy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kiran Karnik. Such an immense pleasure. In fact, over the last more than 25 years, I've had the honor of your and the warmth of your deep interest in my work. Returning from so many trips to remote parts of Asia in particular, I have met you and discussed and always been amazed by the depth of knowledge which you have, which which is rare to be found. So not only have you uh, been excelling in your own fields, but in the field of culture too, you have a depth of knowledge which I have not really seen elsewhere. And thank you so much for all that warmth and for your very warm introduction. Thank you. My many thanks to Kizuna India-Japan Study Forum and to Professor Sushila Narsimhan and Dr. Ashok Jain for this very kind invitation and this deep interest to come and share the deep cultural connections between India and Japan. It is such a pleasure to be here today. My thanks are owed to the Japan Foundation, which gave me a fellowship, which helped me to complete my studies in this field. My grateful thanks are owed to the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, who so kindly agreed to sponsor the film which I wanted to make on this subject and which you are going to see today. It's been a beautiful journey. Ladies and gentlemen, how many are aware that as many Hindu deities are worshipped presently in Japan as in India? In fact, there are scores of temples and shrines to Saraswati alone in Tokyo itself, and hundreds of shrines to Saraswati across Japan. And all the other Hindu deities that we can think of are also worshipped in Japan. Some of the oldest temple to Ganesha, which is actively in worship for continuously in worship for 1,000 years, is in Tokyo. There is a temple to Indra, a huge temple to Indra, which has hundreds of thousands of visitors, which we do not see in India itself, but we find it in Tokyo. And as Kiran mentioned, in fact, before I go on to Sanskrit, I must say that about this worship of deities and Saraswati, it is fascinating to see that the Japanese have preserved ancient culture. So while we in India have evolved in our worship of Saraswati, and we worship her with the Veena as the deity representing inspiration, guidance, education, the finer qualities of life, music, and so much else, which is the finer qualities of life. While we worship her as that today, the Japanese worship her as that with the Veena, which is symbolic of all this. But simultaneously, they continue to worship her also in bodies of water. Half the shrines to Saraswati are actually bodies of water, reminding us of the fact that Saraswati is originally the personification of the river by that name. So ancient knowledge is continued very beautifully in Japan. And as Kiran mentioned, Sanskrit, we note that Homa, called Goma in Japan, is takes place every day in at least 1,200 temples of Japan, if not more. And this Homa is accompanied by chanting in Sanskrit. Now, what is amazing is how do they chant in Sanskrit? How do the priests who do not know how to read Sanskrit chant in Sanskrit? And for that, you have to see their prayer books, where you see the original Sanskrit alphabet, and you also see the translation of that in the Japanese alphabet, kana, which brings you to the most amazing fact. Kana, the Japanese alphabet, was actually created on the phonetics of Sanskrit to make this possible. That is how close is the deep relationship between Japan and India. And talking about the alphabet of Sanskrit, which is the alphabet which the Japanese use. It is the 5th, 6th century alphabet of Sanskrit, which we have forgotten in India, that continues to be preserved and used on a daily basis in Japan. As a matter of fact, today, if you wish to learn Sanskrit in that alphabet, you will have to go to Japan, where is the only school in the world which teaches Sanskrit in that alphabet. So such is the closeness of the relationship, such is the depth of the relationship. It is amazing, in fact, that we are not more conscious of it. But I hope that we will continue to become more conscious of it, because as Kiran mentioned, it is the people-to-people contact which is as important as the contact of the great leaders. Therefore, the appreciation and the knowledge of how close we are to each other, how on a daily basis we follow the same ideas, that is so important. In fact, how many know that the Sanskrit alphabet is present in practically every home of Japan, where it is kept in the shrine room and it is worshipped. So the Sanskrit alphabet of the 5th, 6th century is still very actively worshipped by practically all the people of Japan. How wonderful to know these facts. And even as I say this, my thanks are so warmly owed to the temples of Japan and to the chief priests of the temples of Japan, who made this documentation possible, who made the shooting of this film possible. For as the Director General of the Japan Foundation told an audience, this film takes you into deep into shrines and deities in Japan, which are not easily available to the Japanese people. So it has been, in fact, quite an unprecedented opening of doors by the temples of Japan to allow us to take a peek into this close relationship of the deities. And I must say that it has been extremely kind of them, and I'm deeply grateful to these chief priests for their acknowledgement of the sincerity with which this work was being done. For these priests are, and the Japanese people on the whole, are very conscious of the truth of knowledge, and they do not easily share knowledge, and that is why these doors are normally kept closed, because it is a fear that the knowledge will be misunderstood, misinterpreted, mispresented. So therefore, I am deeply grateful that they appreciated the sincerity with which this film was being made, and they opened these doors. And the people of Japan, who so warmly helped us in every moment of this shooting. The people of Japan came forward, yogis came forward, scholars came forward. They gave of their time in an unlimited manner. It was amazing to see how, in the spirit of bhakti yoga, the people of Japan, very senior interpreter who interprets around the world for Formula One and things like that, people like that came forward. That is, I'm talking about Ms. Keiko Ito. I'm talking also about Chisato Nakayama, a young yogi. How these people came forward to spend of their own time and effort entirely, I think only in a way that only the Japanese can, in the spirit of Bhakti Yoga, to give themselves over, to dedicate themselves to helping and to making this difficult shooting possible across Japan. And I do believe that this is so reflective of the enormous courtesy of Japan. Courtesy which ancient India was a fine example of, and courtesy which is maintained till today in Japan. Courtesy, which is the underlying principle between kindness and caring and progress. Because one thing which we sometimes forget is that progress is also through deep cultural values. And it is these deep cultural values which I think we should observe, and we should observe in ourselves in India, we should observe them in Japan, and we should learn from them to see that it is not only just culture per se, which sometimes we may not take that seriously, but all aspects of life which are nurtured by cultural values, by courtesy, by kindness. That is what makes life beautiful and worth the living for all. And it is this sharing of the values that make life so beautiful, which India and Japan have done so well. And I would request that the film may please be run now, and we'll come back to you after the screening of the film. Thank you so much.
Along with the ideas of Buddhism and Hinduism, the culture of Indian deities traveled across the whole of Asia.
Very interestingly, more than 80% of Japanese gods are originally Indian gods.
This close relationship between the people of India and Japan has not been known to most people. Well-researched books on the subject are also not available.
Most of Japanese don't know. For example, I live in Kichijoji, in the outskirts of Tokyo. This Kichijoji literally means Temple of Kisho Goddess. And Kisho is originally Lakshmi. So thus, I came from Lakshmi town. This should be recognized by Japanese people, the bottom of Japanese culture. Indian culture is very strongly imprinted and developed in the Japanese way.
The Todaiji temple at Nara is one of the oldest and most revered temples of Japan. The 48 feet high Vairochana here is the largest bronze statue in the world.
Already in the 8th century, Indian Buddhist monk named Bodhisena has arrived to Japan, and he inaugurated the eye-opening the ceremony of great Buddha of Todaiji Temple in 752.
Bodhisena and Buddhasthira, they then went to a temple nearby Dayanji where they started the teaching of Sanskrit in Japan for the first time.
When the Japanese studied Sanskrit in the 8th and 9th centuries, Sanskrit was synonymous with the Siddham script. This was used for writing Sanskrit since the 5th century in India.
Thus, Japan and India was very closely connected. If you go to Japanese tomb, you may find sit-down letters. No Japanese can read these letters written on the tomb timber. And again in Japan, there is a Koya-san temples. In this Koya-san temples, they have still sit-down Sanskrit the school. Many monks are learning this Sanskrit, but the Sanskrit is sit-down letters. So perhaps Japan is a time capsule of Indian culture. Already in India disappeared.
There is a deep relationship between Kana, the Japanese alphabet, and Sanskrit. The Japanese wrote Sanskrit through simplified Chinese characters which developed into the Japanese alphabet, Kana.
And this Japanese, the alphabet, pronouns A, I, U, E, O, like Sanskrit, exactly as the Sanskrit.
In Japan, they also use the Indian letters for writing of sacred syllables or bijaksharas, which have the power of mantras. Every Buddhist monastery in Japan has a seal in which there is a bijakshara, a sacred syllable, as a short name of the monastery. There are some words in Japanese which are derived from Sanskrit, like O Seva, from Seva, service. And there are about 100 Sanskrit words which are used in Japanese.
Most of the Japanese, they are using that, but without knowing that that is the originally from Sanskrit. Suppose like they call the Buddhist temples at Thera. Thera means it is from the Pali term Thera, means a Buddhist monk, a bhikshu having 10 years experience.
In the words of His Excellency Mr. Yasukuni Enoki, as I come from the Japanese Lakshmi town, it is no great surprise to me to find that Japanese life is full of so many Hindu deities. Japanese people are unaware of their origins. One of the most revered deities of Japan is Saraswati. There are scores of shrines built to her. In many ways, the original concept of Saraswati and her association with the natural order and good fortune are very well preserved in Japan. She is often visualized as a sacred body of water. In Japan, we find the continuance of so many early ideas of Indian philosophy. The annals of the Todaiji temple mention that the celebration of the worship of Lakshmi and Saraswati was held for the first time in this temple in 722 AD. Ever since, it has been an annual celebration. In 1836, Saito Sachio wrote a guidebook to the Edo area or modern Tokyo. Saraswati was mentioned as the most popular deity here at that time. In 1934, Lady Chiben Sonyo felt that she had become an incarnation of Saraswati. She started writing in Sanskrit, though she had never studied the language. She founded the Benten Shu, Saraswati sect. This sect holds water as divine, as it is the abode of Saraswati. We are reminded that Saraswati is the personification of the great river which once flowed in India. Benten Shu also worships her to bestow eloquence and learning. Worship of Lakshmi was done to ensure the peace of the land, wind and rain in good season, good harvests, joy of the people, and the good of all sentient beings. The great intellectual genius of Japan was Kukai or Kobo Daishi of the 9th century. He learnt the Sanskrit script from the Kashmiri Acharya Prajna. Kobo Daishi placed emphasis on a knowledge of Sanskrit. He said that the Japanese have had to rely upon translations to study Buddhism. However, the true words in the original language are exceedingly important. Every word has a profound meaning.
The Japanese people use Sanskrit when they pray. Suppose in Sanskrit they say, Om Saraswati Swaha. In Japanese it becomes Om Saraswati Ke Swaka. In Japan, they are preserving the old Indian tradition because they are following the ancient scriptures. They are also doing the puja and the mudras as well as the sadhana. There is nothing called Japanese or Japanese elements in these. It is the Indian Buddhist Tantric tradition.
The Vajrayana Buddhist traditions of Japan trace their knowledge back to India, to Nagarjuna and other great acharyas of the Nalanda University.
Nagarjuna is known as Gujio in Japan. Without his teaching, the Buddhism of the Great Vehicle would not have existed.
The Lotus Sutra is a major spiritual creation with a profound impact on life in Japan. It was translated from the Sanskrit by Kumara Jiva 1600 years ago.
This is a temple that follows the Lotus Sutra. The sutra is originally from India and goes back to the teachings of the Buddha himself. It started from India and came to Japan.
A temple is dedicated to the deity Indra in the Shibamata area of Tokyo. It is a most important Indra shrine today.
This temple has 200,000 visitors on the New Year alone. There would be about 2 million visitors every year.
Varuna has been worshipped in many temples in Japan to prevent droughts, typhoons and floods which occur often in Japan. A shrine was dedicated to Varuna in the Fudodo Sanctuary in Tokyo in 1836. The temple also has a representation of Kamadeva. He is worshipped by many young couples. There are many temples dedicated to Yama in Japan.
The sound of the word Yama became Emma as the name traveled and came to Japan.
It is the most ancient temple to Lord Ganesha which has been in use for the last 1,000 years. And young boys and girls go there to be successful in their courtship. The merchants go there to gain success in their business. The oldest which has been continuously in worship for the last 1,000 years. And I don't think anywhere in the world we have a temple to Lord Ganesha who has been there in constant worship for the last millennium.
In the 7th century, Prince Shotoku created the nation-state of Japan after vanquishing his rivals. He took the term Tenno for emperor from Sanskrit texts.
And at the same time, he also wrote down a constitution for his country in 17 articles. Article 3 of the constitution clearly points out that the constitution is being based on the three Ratna, the Buddha, the Dharma and the Sangha. This is the first Asian constitution ever written. Important point is that its consecration was done with a Sanskrit text which is called the Ushnisha Vijaya Dharani.
The Sanskrit manuscript used for the consecration of the constitution would have been obtained from the Hindu kingdom of Champa in Vietnam. Havan or Homa continues in Japan, where it is called Goma. Goma in the Shingon and Tendai Buddhist sects of Japan has striking parallels with early Hindu rites of Agni worship. There are also deep similarities with the later Tantric tradition. The Havan is perhaps conducted in Japan at least as often as in India. The Tantric Shingon school of Japan sings Sanskrit hymns. To this day, followers of the sect perform their worship in 1,200 temples throughout Japan.
Esoteric Buddhism is from India, and the big philosophy of the universe is, of course, from India.
Vajrayana Buddhist worship in Japan is similar to Tibetan Buddhist worship. However, the Japanese tradition has preserved some early Vajrayana rites. A study of Japanese Buddhism helps to fill some gaps in our understanding of the development of Buddhism.
There are 4 types of Shingon mantras or Fudo-myu in Japan. These are the mantras used in Japan which are not in the Japanese language. They are taken from the Sanskrit language of India. In Sanskrit, Fudo is called Achalanatha. He seems to have his origin in the Hindu deity Shiva. The Mu is called Vidya Raja in Sanskrit. Here, it can be safely stated that Fudo-myu has his origin in the Hindu deities of India.
A sutra compares the cosmic force of the mantra with the mighty roar of a rising flood. The mantras were transcribed into ideograms, and to conserve their full power, they were also written in Siddham. Indian letters to a Japanese are sacred and stand for divine beings. To this day, the Japanese write mantras in Siddham.
This booklet contains prayers in Sanskrit that are commonly used in Shingonshu or esoteric Buddhism. It is written in Japanese, but the mantras are in Sanskrit. It is used in many ceremonies in Buddhism. Priests learn the intonation and how to pronounce it by using this booklet, which has Sanskrit and also has Japanese letters to convey the sounds of the Sanskrit words. Every god has his own Bija Akshara. People also worship that Bija Akshara. Every temple gives much importance to those Bija Aksharas because they are equal to God. Visitors bring an album. We call it Shinchin. The visitors go to various temples and collect these Siddham stamps in the albums. These albums are like holy books for the people. We belong to a Zen Buddhist monastery, and we strive hard to sever the bond of birth, senility, disease and death. The bond which is the cause of all suffering. As the Buddha said, desire is the root cause of pain in the world and should be overcome. This forms the basis of our ascetic practices, which come down to us from the Shakyamuni himself.
Bodhidharma, he transmitted Zen. Zen later has been transmitted to Japan also, and it is one of the most important sects in Japan.
Mist surround the legend of Bodhidharma. Tradition points out that he was a prince of Kanchipuram in South India. The Japanese form of his name is Bodhai Daruma. It is very close to the Tamil form, which is Bodhi Daruma. Zen was introduced in the 6th century. It was a wordless tradition, directly pointing to the human mind and the perception of one's true nature. Zen was taken to Japan in the 12th century by Isai. Its influence on Japanese art, attitudes, and language has been profound.
Zen Buddhism became very popular because it says that life is a fleeting phenomenon. And the samurai, when they went to war, they were never sure that they will come back. In this feeling, they go to war and there is no fear of death. So fearlessness in war was a very important contribution of the Zen tradition. And if you sit down, and when we sit down in a Zen monastery, you have to really do a very hard penance. And hard work in Japan is perfection. So it is the Zen tradition gave them a perfection in work. Force became a very important part of the modern development, perfection in everything.
When I visited India for the first time, I made sure to visit places like Nalanda University, Bodh Gaya, and also the garden path trodden by the Shakyamuni himself. I felt happy to see the university where Tripitaka masters used to come and study during the 3rd and 4th centuries AD. Whatever Buddhism we practice now has its roots in India, and without Indians, there would be no Buddhism in Japan. So many deities are common in India and Japan, and people are worshipping them in both the countries. The hearts of the Indian people and the Japanese people have the same base.
Japan is the one country where Buddhism is flourishing in all its facets. Here, technology and transcendence are living together. The deep-rooted spirit of Buddha's teachings energize the Japanese people. Buddhist temples are numerous, and vast numbers of people visit them every day. Besides the Buddha, so many ancient Indian deities and practices are preserved in these temples. An Indian feels quite at home in Japan.
Thank you, Benoy. So delightful to see that. Amazing. Do you want to say a few words before we open for a few questions?
Thank you. Yes, please. A seeming miracle in the story of man is this spread of ideas. Ideas do not seem to know the barriers of high mountains or vast oceans. And the warm acceptance of the ideas of life by the people of very faraway lands underlines the sameness of the human condition everywhere. And I believe the travel of the ideas of Buddhism, of deities, of Sanskrit, all the way from India to Japan is perhaps one of the finest examples of the travel of ideas in history. Yes, please. We could take some questions.
Thank you, Benoy. Very, very well said. A grand ending to that film. We do have some time for questions. So questions or very brief comments would be welcome. Benoy, while others think of the war, articulate their questions, just a quick question to you. How long did it take you to do the research and to go around and get this film done? Very painstaking effort, I can see. So what was the kind of time commitment that it involved?
Well, the research really began in 1994 in my first visit to Japan. And it was pointed out to me by Professor Iku Hirayama that there was so much similarity in the worship of deities. And I began to look at it from there. And over the years, there was some research. I learned a little more as I went. And then finally, the concentrated research was done in over a period of about 4 years. And for that, I also owe my thanks to the Japan Foundation, who gave me a fellowship to complete this research. It was indeed a marvelous journey. Of course, right from the word go, as the film says, an Indian feels quite at home in Japan. And that was right from the first time that I went to Japan. It seemed that there was so much that was similar. In fact, I remember feeling that the Japanese are more Indian than the Indians are. There is a basis of culture which runs very, very deeply. It is not only the language and the words and the worship. It is an entire cultural tradition which was shared. And the sense of that is everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
There is a question in the
Yes.
chat box by Shubh Agarwal. Shall I read it?
Yes, please.
Please.
How did Zen come to existence, and how were they influenced to do everything with perfection from the concept of Zen?
Yes. Zen actually is Dhyana Buddhism, which first traveled from India to China, and then from China to Japan. In China, it was called Chan Buddhism, and in Japan, it is Dhyana. And it is from Dhyana that we develop concentration. By putting away the noise and glamour of the material world around us. It is by putting away the desires. It is by putting away the wall of so many things around us. We learn to focus on that which is true, on that which is within. And therefore, that which is beautiful and true, and therefore the That is where the perfection comes from, or from concentration. It is a whole tradition of concentration. Thank you.
The question, Dr. Ashok Jain, do you have a question?
Yes, please. May
Please, please.
It's a fascinating sort of description of intermingling of so-called Hindu deities with Buddhism. Sanskrit. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Okay. Now, I think this is something very, very, very Japanese, to be able to assimilate ideas from different sources and then recreate it in their own fashion and practice it in their own fashion. And more importantly, I think these messages and understanding are conveyed in a fashion which are practiced, whether it's in production systems or in social relations. And to me, this is fascinating that nowhere do we see the kind of unabsorbed manifestation of images and so on and so forth. And this, I think, is not simply the influence of, it is influence of Indian culture and exposure, but I think the ability to absorb and evolve, isn't it something to do with their also cultural contact with China? I think there is a kind of the social, the social absorption of this is not, it's basically Confucius kind of a thing. I don't know whether I'm able to explain myself. But do you get it, Professor Behl?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Jain. Actually, when we look at ancient India, we realize that there was actually nothing called a separated religion of Buddhism or Hinduism or Jainism. If you look at the inscriptions which survive from ancient India, and much more than 95% of all the history of ancient India is known only from these inscriptions. Now, if you look at these inscriptions, you realize that in every single family that we know about from ancient India, there was somebody who was worshipping so-called Buddhist deity, there was somebody who was worshipping so-called Hindu deity or a Jain deity. So the idea of separated religions is really a colonial construct. And therefore you find that what the Japanese are doing is simply taking forward what you see at the most ancient Buddhist stupa railings. If you go to the earliest surviving Buddhist stupa railings, those of Bharut, which are kept in originally from central India, which are now kept in the Indian Museum, Kolkata, or if you look at the railings of the earliest stupa at Sanchi, you find all this. You find, in fact, that the earliest depictions of Lakshmi that exist were not in Hindu context, but were actually at the Buddhist stupas. So the Saraswati is.
We are near the end, and I will begin to wrap up.
No, we are on. I think there
his bandwidth, Benoy seems to have a problem. I could see his bandwidth is having a problem. So,
I see Professor Shashi Tiwari raising her hand. Maybe we could take the question. Yes,
let's take the question or comment in any case. And then
it is a comment only.
Okay, good.
And especially I am thankful to Dr. Sushila ji, because for the first time I am attending this forum. But I am really very happy that this program was related to Sanskrit and Vedic deities and home, etc. These are my subject. Actually, I am a student of Vedic literature, so all these things were my subject, and I am amazed. I am also fascinated to see how authentic collection Mr. Behl has made in this film, and especially Lokesh Chandra was there to comment. So it was I am actually very happy. And script and Indra and Saraswati, Lakshmi, all these things remind me how beautifully he has shown the culture of India, in ancient India and also Japan. And one more thing I especially came to know from this film, that there is a temple of Indra, because Indra is the biggest deity in the Rig Veda, but any temple is not in India. So it is in Japan. This is a great information for me. And regarding Saraswati, what he was mentioning is perfectly all right. That was firstly a river, then a deity of learning and Vidya Devi. So I am actually thankful to all of you and to this forum, and I am all congratulations to Mr. Behl for making such a nice feature film. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tiwari. We will certainly convey to him.
Yeah.
I think
He's
there's
there.
one.
He's there.
Oh, he's there. Okay, good. There is one more question at least I see.
Yes. Shall I read it out?
Yes, please.
Mr. Behl, you have to unmute yourself. You are, I think, saying something. Professor Behl, please unmute yourself.
Yes. I want to say
Yes,
another
there is
word
a
on
question in the chat box.
Indra.
There is a question in the chat box.
Before that, can I just say one word on Indra before we move on?
Yes.
Yeah. You heard that? Yes. Sorry,
Actually,
I thought I was about to repeat it. No, please, can you say something on that?
Yes. The earliest representation of Indra in Indian art is in fact in the Buddhist caves of Bhaja in Maharashtra of the 2nd century BCE. So Indra has been equally important right from the beginning in the Buddhist tradition. I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Shall I read the question in the
Yes,
chat
please,
box?
if you can do
that. This is Shubh Agarwal again. I am fascinated on how much of effect the Britishers had on North Indian and Indian subcontinent's culture, and how Japan has preserved the raw essence of Buddhism and Hinduism.
Indeed. The colonial rule did take away much of our knowledge, and Japan is an island that has preserved much of ancient culture. It is also something to do with the importance that the Japanese give to true knowledge. And just like we used to in ancient India, where we used to take the finest and most distilled knowledge, and we used to preserve it in...
Are there any other questions, Sushila, or should we begin to wrap up?
I think we can wrap up.
Okay, just in closing, a few comments, and I'm very pleased and delighted that this thing went through very smoothly, except for the last few minutes, which is unfortunate, but everything else was good. So I think the audience we have had here, I'm assuming you all enjoyed the film. It was very, very revealing, I'm sure, to most of us, to see the kind of temples in Japan, how ancient culture from India, the Buddhist culture, has been preserved and kept going there, and some very interesting facets of how it has got into, I think, as Ashokji said so well, how it has got into their society much more deeply and very deep-rooted than elsewhere. And that I think culture in the way it has carried through is tremendously important. And the fact that it has sustained for 1,000+ years has, I think, much to say about how it has gone ahead. And well, I see Benoy is back and I see one hand up. Do you want to take one more question, Sushilaji, before I just close off as what it was?
Professor Miki Nishioka, I think she wants to ask the question. This will be the last question.
Yeah.
Is it all right, Professor Behl? Yes.
Go ahead.
Professor Nishioka, please.
Thank you for a very interesting lecture. I'm very impressed. But I didn't know that Tera has come from Pali. I didn't know that. Is it really? Is it true?
Professor Behl, it's a comment actually, a question by Professor Miki Nishioka.
Yeah.
That has Thera really come from?
Pali,
Pali.
has really come from Pali. I just checked an online dictionary, so there are some, what should I say, the stories, I mean, etymologies.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of them. But do you think it has really come from Pali?
Benoy, go ahead.
Thank you.
Professor Nishioka, you could send an email in case.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
I will ask him directly.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Maybe we'll get you an answer on that from Benoy. Yeah. Meantime, I think we will have to wind up now. And so once again, a special word of thanks to Professor Behl for a very, very interesting film and equally interesting comments to start with. As I said at the end, we had a bit of a problem, but he did get to answer some of the questions and add something to the film and what we saw. So it's a very amazing story, which I'm sure many people, including me at least, didn't know at all. The depth of interaction that has taken place, the level of absorption in Japan and Japanese society of the kind of exchange that have happened. And most interesting of all, how did all this happen so long ago at such a long distance? Today, with the kind of thing we're doing today, with the internet and global communication connectivity via satellite or optical fiber, it's so easy. But imagine 1,000 years ago, what traveled across, who traveled across, and the power of ideas is what it tells you about. The power of an idea that can travel so far and get so deeply embedded without anything at all, but just the idea. There's no force of arms, there's no pressure, there are not a million people telling you what to do. It's just the idea and how it's caught on and where it goes. So it tells you about what that is. It also shows you the strength of Buddhism and the Buddhist ideas and philosophy and the deep Indian traditions with which it was there. And as Professor Behl said earlier, the intermingling of religions in India, where there was really no separation. There were a number of deities and people worshipped or went to the deities and, did whatever they had to do, irrespective of where it was. And this kind of intermingling of ideas, of religions, is something which is very deep-rooted in India. And those ideas, I think, went across the borders, across the oceans. And the Japanese, I'm very happy to see, have preserved it so very well. And that says a lot for their society too. Today, as I started with, we are back to a very close interaction. And I'm hoping that these past tradition of centuries ago would help us to once again revive a very strong connectivity between Japan and India. Today, it's not just ideas, it's trade, it's goods, it's services, it's people, it's tourism. So that should supplement the power of ideas that have gone back and forth. And today, as we all know, there's an equal or greater flow of ideas, thoughts, goods, services coming from Japan to us. And I do think that we need to absorb many of them. There are lots of things we can learn from Japan and which we need to. But at a much broader sphere, this is something for the world at large to see how ideas flow, how one culture, one society works with another, how there's synergy, and how it leads to positive ideas in a positive framework. So with those words, Professor Narsimhan, let me hand back to you to wind up and close this off. But once again, thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Benoy, for a delightful session. And thank you to all our participants for questions, participation, just listening and absorbing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Behl, for an awesome and breathtaking presentation. Your photography and the way you have collected the Buddhist temples, Hindu deities, and the scriptures in Siddham script. I mean, you gave us the glimpses of the wonder that was India. And it was really wonderful having Mr. Kiran Karnik as the chair and listening to your comments. Thank you very much for your interest in Kizuna activities and sparing time for us despite your hectic schedule. And I hope to see you in our forthcoming lecture sessions also. On behalf of the Kizuna India-Japan Study Forum, I thank all other participants from India and abroad who were able to join us via Zoom. Our next lecture is by Miss Helen Christina Xavier, which will be held on Saturday, October 7th at the same time. She will be speaking on Kabuki and Kathakali, the lost siblings. So try to attend that also, and looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much and namaskar.